6.5%, was it? Is that what the current odds are of the Stanley Cup?
Well, and if you look at the round-by-round progression, the Stanley Cup favorite is the Vancouver Canucks.
Like, what a time to be alive!
Talking you through every goalie controversy, scoring slump, and draft lottery bust, this is the C4 Podcast on CanucksHockeyBlog.com. Here they are, the best starting lineup we could afford under the salary cap. Chris, Matt, Anna, and Adam.
Welcome to another episode of the C4 Canucks Hockey Podcast, brought to you by CanucksHockeyBlog.com and the Full Press Coverage Network. I am Chris at Lightforce, joined virtually, as always, by the best co-host in the Canucks podcast sphere, Anna Forsyth at A4Forsyth03. How's it going, Anna?
Oh, that's very sweet. I'm going good, yeah. You know, all things considered, and with the current environment we're in, I'm doing a lot better than some of the people living in the city, so yeah, I'm getting along.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get into it on the show, obviously. It's been a week, literally, figuratively. Some might feel it's been longer, and they wouldn't be wrong. The Vancouver Canucks are currently going through a hellstorm. Yeah, like it's obviously the topic that's been on everyone's mind. Yeah, if you happen to listen to our show and you, or not even a Canucks fan, you've obviously been thinking about what's going on in Vancouver. There are Canucks podcasts that have recorded emergency episodes, multiple emergency episodes. We are not one of them. Not to suggest what we're talking about today when it comes to COVID isn't a big issue. It's just it's so surreal, and you know, you and I had thought there wasn't this need to sort of, you know, beat that drum, and that's not against those who did. It's just,
yeah, I mean, surreal is the word for it for sure, and we've definitely learned a lot more each day. So whatever our first reaction would have been, it would have been quickly out of date. I mean, maybe we're not learning more. Maybe we're more confused than ever. There's certainly a lot of information out there, so hard to know completely what's going on. But it's just a very different world we're living in than when we recorded last week.
Yeah. The other thing that I was going to touch on, just to sort of introduce the show, is if you follow me on Twitter, at Lightforce, obviously, but if you follow me on Twitter, you've probably noticed that I am in COVID protocol myself. Well, our household does not have the same protocol that the NHL does. Baby Force's daycare over the course of the weekend had multiple positive tests, and she has been informed that she must self-isolate for the next 14 days. Now, she put up some protestation, being 3.5 years old and all, but yeah, it does mean that my household is in lockdown for the next 2 weeks while we wait.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, you can definitely identify more than me with Canucks players and what they're going through right now.
Yeah, although in fairness, I think some of the players are going through much more significant experience than we are. I mean, I consider us fortunate.
I guess you'd be in the place of the close contact who is currently self-isolating, unnamed close contact.
Exactly, which is also a topic we'll get into in the F word. But in between these conversations, we have a phenomenal guest lined up tonight, and today we're recording at night. Tom Bannock at the Sport Market. You might know him from his time on the radio here in Vancouver. He's still on the radio here in Vancouver, but he was also one of the co-founders of Team 1040. Tom's going to join Anna and I a little bit later to talk a little bit about the business of sport. We're going to spend some time talking about, obviously, how the pandemic has impacted the NHL and the business side, but we also get to chat with them about sort of, you know, Team 1040, TSN 1040, the transformation in the sort of sports media landscape. And it is a phenomenal conversation with Tom. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's a relatively long one. This is going to be a big episode. If you didn't already notice the time when you downloaded and pressed play, this is probably one of our longest episodes in forever. And yet I feel it's one of the best. And then we've had some good ones too, but Tom's a fabulous guest. And totally. I quite frankly wish I could have told all of you that he was joining us sooner, but as we have been apt to do, we keep all the secrets for those who sign up to our newsletter. If you haven't done so already, it's bit.ly/the C4 newsletter. But yeah, let's waste no further of your time. We'll start rewinding things here using the C4 Canucks Hockey Podcast and CanucksHockeyBlog.com and the Full Press Coverage Network. Thinking back to our last episode, I want to say we sort of chatted about the possibility that the Vancouver Canucks may not play because of someone. At the time, I believe we knew that Adam Gaudette had entered a COVID protocol. Jake Virtanen wasn't feeling well and was kept away from the team.
So, yeah, I'm trying to remember because Adam Gaudette was pulled out of practice Tuesday, was he not?
Tuesday, yeah. Okay, so then
that
maybe
would
there
have
was...
been before, or there was definitely maybe a rumor.
Might have been a rumor because like at the time when we were talking, there was definitely, it was indication that there was a Vancouver Canuck that had a COVID protocol. So maybe it was what was perceived to be an asymptomatic test. Like I don't know the timing. I mean, that's how surreal it's been. We're not talking about months ago. We're talking about literally 1 week ago, and everything that has developed over time since then. I mean, the Vancouver Canucks are currently dealing with COVID in a extreme way, and not just sort of COVID-19 as we know it, but the P1 variant, which is considered to be an extremely aggressive version of coronavirus disease. So, we've heard conflicting reports, which we'll touch on, but the point being is that there are a number of people who are currently ill, and the one area that we have some sort of transparency with is actually sort of Adam Gaudette's situation, because Michaela Gaudette has been sharing some of the symptoms that both she and him are experiencing and how they have felt. Like, these are young athletes who are in what we would think is the prime of their health, right? They have a professional infrastructure that surrounds them, providing them nutrition, physical fitness, all of these supports that just sort of you, Anna, myself, we don't have, easy access to. And I think if you were thinking that this isn't a big deal, this should be the lights on, bright situation that it is impacting this team as heavily as it is. And that's just at a pure health and, safety level. We are not even talking about hockey. We're just talking about people and getting through this.
Yeah. I mean, we may have been dealing with the whole COVID situation over the course of the season with some kind of amount of dark humor or whatever, but I don't think any one of us ever thought that it wasn't serious, and now we're seeing it really hit home just how serious it can be, because the thing with the variant is, one, more serious symptoms often, but two, way more infectious. So you see it rip through a team so quickly, and just pulling a couple of players out of practice won't do it, I'm afraid. It very quickly became much more serious than that.
Yeah. And I think back sort of to the start of the shortened season. I think Dallas had been going through quite a bit of struggle. I mean, they were probably the one team that got hit hardest prior to sort of the Vancouver Canucks. I mean, we've seen a number of teams sort of in the US for the most part, but it wasn't until Montreal had their, struggles just a few weeks back. And I remember at the time we sort of had this conversation where we were kind of wondering if maybe the NHL should take a more conservative approach. Now, we're not epidemiologists. We have no science background here, but we're just relying on the information that's readily available, in that if someone is symptomatic or is tested positive, they're asymptomatic, that there is the possibility that infection could occur, and it could take up to 2 weeks for the incubation and actual transmissibility to be an issue. So last week's episode, we started talking about, well, the math is kind of still there. Could this be related? But by all accounts, it's not. I mean, we're not scientists. It seems like it's likely not to be Montreal. There is a possibility, but I think it does still highlight. I think it's still a worthy case to make, that it highlights the lack of caution maybe that was taken with the protocol around Montreal. And it does seem like, that it may be within protocol, everything they've done, the Canucks, but that
practice seems like a really bad idea now.
Well, and again, hindsight, we look back at that practice as being potentially the quote unquote super spreader event.
Spreader, yeah.
I mean, this could have already been an issue. It could have been, an earlier game. There could have been a number of factors that at play. I mean, when I say earlier game, would have been a few weeks previous. But the point is that the Vancouver Canucks are currently seeing players on a daily basis being added to NHL COVID protocol. Like today, for instance, Niels Hoglander was added to the list. Now, being added to the protocol list doesn't necessarily mean a positive case. It means that either positive or close contacts.
Yeah.
I would imagine at this point, it's probably less close contact simply because I imagine that players have been told to lock themselves in a closet if they're healthy. Right?
Yeah, and it does seem like they are being more specific now with the number of cases that they have clarified. For example, the unnamed taxi squad member that is self-isolating has not received a positive test. Close contact precaution.
But it is still a very scary situation. And, knowing that, someone like Adam Gaudette has been laid up, like Michaela Gaudette has shared that, Adam is sick, right? Like I'm not going to go and extrapolate how, but I think, in what she has tweeted out publicly, it's apparent this is more than, it's just a flu. It's more than just a cold. Was Adam fine when he was practicing? Yeah, based on NHL protocol, like that was the thing is that there was no, suggestion of anything otherwise. It's just unfortunately, the ability to have symptoms, to be infectious but not yet be symptomatic exists, and it's that sort of gray area that I feel the NHL sort of needs to reconsider. And yet, as late as today, Bill Daly is saying that no, the NHL is not going to adjust its protocols. They're simply learning from the Vancouver Canucks situation with the P1 variant, because this is the first time the P1 variant has been present in NHL COVID protocol.
I mean, so IMAC wrote an article today where he went into the memo that went around the league as a result of, the situation with the Canucks. But if you read the memo, it doesn't say anything. It just reiterates the importance of sticking to the current protocol. So I'm not really sure what they're doing apart from posturing there.
Yeah. You're right. It probably is simply posturing. It's just an interesting posture to present. Like I would think the NHL would be more apt to say, at this point in time, we're exploring multiple avenues, number of different pathways. We're learning from what's taking place right now. But instead, it's like, no, we have no plans to change. Like, not to say it was, I'm delivering it far more cavalier than it was. Let's be honest. But it just, I feel that this is more indicative of how the NHL deals with things. Like
in a reactive way, or
nothing's ever really that big of a deal or bigger than the game. And again,
God forbid anything be bigger than the game of hockey.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting the NHL doesn't have the health and safety of its players, somewhere behind, the business side of the sport. But it's difficult as a fan not to think that that's a possibility. Like at this point in time, I'm almost going back to my original point that I made last year where I'd said, you know what, if the NHL doesn't return, I'm kind of okay with that.
Yeah.
Because it's the human side. I love hockey. I love watching hockey. I hate that the Vancouver Canucks have had a tough season, as much as I might talk about here's everything that they need to do, and I hope that this change happens, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, I care for the people. And I want them to be healthy. I want them to be safe. Like there are impacts that you will experience with COVID-19 that are a series of unknowns, like the long haul effects. I have a personal friend of mine who actually was COVID-19 positive last March. So she was actually diagnosed pre sort of pandemic declaration. As of today, she still experiences health symptoms or adverse health symptoms, based on lung capacity, based on a variety of different things that her doctor and the doctors she's seen are still trying to figure out, because this is so novel that there are so many unanswered questions, and the testing isn't sufficient to have a sample that can make a determinative course or action. Like, so you think about the players, they're now entering the unknown. And if, let's say, everyone is then healthy, what does that mean for their short-term career and the rest of the Canucks season? But what does it mean for their long-term career?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this last week in regards to injuries in general, didn't we? A bit about how you sometimes have to save players from themselves in order to promote their long-term well-being. Yeah, it's hard to know what the answer is because, was I happy hockey came back this year? Yes. It's better for my mental health to be able to watch hockey in these dark times. No matter how terribly the Canucks play, it is better for me. And I enjoy that, and I enjoy talking about hockey. But if they said it's just too dangerous, we don't have the resources to protect the players, I would equally accept that as a response. But now we're in the thick of it. We're staring down the final stretch of games.
Yeah.
There's so many more cogs to the machine. There's local rights holders, national rights holders. There's the draft. There's all kinds of things that need to get sorted out. And I think there will come a time if we can't get back to play that the NHL will have to do something. But
definitely something that we can explore with Tom a little bit later on in the show. But, thinking back to the Canucks specifically and some of the results, I mean, the reports that we've heard, I'm not going to say they've been conflicted. I think there has been different people talking to different people, presenting much different information. So word comes out a few days ago from Darren Dreger that the Vancouver Canucks are seeing some seriously concerning symptoms as a result of the illness, dehydration, nausea, vomiting, severe fatigue, and that the team itself has been arranging for players to receive intravenous treatment, but no hospitalization at this point. And then soon after, Ben Kuzma comes out to suggest those reports are far too extreme. There are far more players simply in protocol, mild symptoms, if any at all. And I think he said there was one person.
Yeah, that's what he
right.
said.
Right now,
that was experiencing more severe symptoms.
And if you were to take that, I would think that maybe that's the Adam Gaudette, because you can't
deny
dance around that, because Michaela has sort of outlined what Adam is dealing with. And I'm not trying to suggest that Ben Kuzma is wrong in his presentation, but what he's presenting is completely counter to what Darren Dreger was. This kicked off because, again, Canucks Twitter, very polarizing Twitter wars, where you had Team Kuzma, Team Toronto, and with Darren Dreger. But the thing about the Dreger report is it's not just him who's been suggesting that there's some serious issues at play. Irf has suggested that. Rick Dollywall. I'm sorry. There are very few people in sort of Vancouver media that I would ever I don't think so. Rick's not that, I don't know how anyone could say. If Rick says it, it's like, okay, well, that's true. It's just a matter of time. And it's so surreal that this is even a thing. And then from there, you have the vitriol. And this is, I would like to think that I am generally supportive of differing voices when it comes to Canucks Twitter. I have my take and my voice, and I don't tolerate some of the things that people will say. I hate the gatekeeping aspect. I will call into question anyone who promotes misogyny or looks to bully, but I'm willing to accept that people might have different takes. But then you have this element of people going after, the players for violating protocol. You've got people propagating rumors in Canucks.com about, I saw this player, they're not even following their own protocol. That, there could very well be truth to that, but then it's almost propagating this issue of, let's go and find who caused it and pitchfork them.
Yeah, it's crazy. Honestly, I think this is peak of Canucks Twitter, Canucks internet, that So I follow a couple of the like Canucks dogs on Instagram just because they're cute dogs. And like Zach
How's Gus
McEwen.
doing? Because Gus has to have an account, right?
Yes. And I just don't need to follow Gus because Bo just like reposts everything Gus posts anyway, so it's fine. But yeah, I follow Zach McEwen's dog, and he has a really adorable new puppy who's Duck Tola. Being a good East Coast boy, he had to get a Duck Tola puppy, obviously. But people giving his fiance grief for like going out for walks with a dog, like clearly, and she had to clarify that she had been told at that current moment, which is now no longer the case, that she was allowed to go on out with the dog.
Yeah. Well, Michaela Gaudette was being attacked for going to the grocery store. And why it was is that the NHL teams essentially provided a list of things that they suggested their players not do. Because you think of it, like when I go to Costco on Saturdays, which is not happening now for the next 2 weeks, but when I go to Costco on Saturdays, I'm introducing the vector of transmissibility.
Right.
I follow protocol. I maintain distance. I'm wearing my mask. I'm sanitizing my hands. I'm washing my hands. Like I'm doing everything that I've been instructed to do. NHL players are under those same rules. It's just that teams have then said, hey, we would rather you not go and do this because we just prefer to remove the vector of transmissibility.
As far as
Can you
I
find
know that like Adam Gaudette was not doing that anyway.
No,
like
but let's say
like,
Michelle
come on.
is. I'm like, at the end of the day, why is that an issue? They need to get food. Like, you know, I think people are being
like this isn't the bubble. You can't like we've agreed with the league that it's safe enough for players to quote unquote live somewhat normally at home with their families, and then they are being way safer than you or I. Yes, okay, they have more resources to do so, but yeah, they are definitely taking extra precautions, getting tested all the time. Honestly, we shouldn't be asking why this happened to the Canucks. Like, we should be thanking our stars that it hasn't happened more than a couple times in Canada.
And sooner. Like, it really what it comes down to is this is a really serious situation. And I'm going to start bringing it back home. The daycare facility that my daughter has been going to has been running a really tight ship. The kids are wearing, like, we're talking kids, like from 1 up, wearing masks. Wow. Right?
That's good.
This isn't a mandate in elementary schools, or it wasn't until recently in our childcare facility. They've been wearing masks. They've been outside a lot, washing hands, distancing. When I go and pick her up, I have a designated time to pick up and drop off my daughter, and I don't interact with that. Like, again, this is a situation they have created to try to prevent. And despite these best efforts, a positive case has turned into more than one positive case, and it's closed down. So now translate this into, any circumstance in any organization. It's unfortunate that this is the case. Now, when do the Vancouver Canucks return to action? We don't know. I mean, again, there are so many question marks. There was talk about, okay, could that the league then have the Canucks return because they'll bring in taxi squad members and what have you, maybe call players up from Utica. Utica's been going through its own situation. And then you have the essentially, yes, the 1 week sort of quarantine that exists. As far as I understand, still that's 1 week till you can practice with your team.
Yeah.
You still have a week additional
quarantine.
Yeah, you still have 1 additional week of actual quarantine where you're...
Yeah, exactly.
So there is a lot of different sort of balls in the air when it comes to the return to NHL hockey here in Vancouver.
Yeah, I think it's very much movable feast, and we don't know the answer yet. I think at the time they were talking about calling up Utica squad members, they actually had more positive cases than the Canucks, which now isn't the case. But yeah, I think Wednesday or Thursday this week was the original plan to return to practice. I don't see that happening. They've been told to stay isolated till Sunday. Yeah. So that's, I think, earliest the Canucks will come out of isolation is a week today, Monday.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of the roster is currently on protocol list. So, like, arguably, if you bring up every accessible player that they have here in Canada, they're still short.
Yeah.
Right. So just on numbers alone, it requires either the protocol to run its time or the quarantine requirement of anyone coming up from the United States. So we're looking at least, I think, a week longer, and dependent on that, maybe even more. The thing about what's happening with the Vancouver Canucks in COVID-19 is it also takes away from the fact that Jim actually signed a contract.
Yeah. He was
not Jim
trying
himself. Like Jim signed a contract, but not for
Yeah.
Jim. Just to
No.
clear that up.
I was going to say his name is on the contract. I think he does still have to sign it, but no,
Yeah.
it was to sign Thatcher Demko on a 5x5 contract. So we have a goalie future secured, which we were wondering about last week. So
what are your thoughts on this? Like, I'll admit, when I saw 5x5, I'm like, not bad, actually. I'm not too upset by the number. I see that it buys a few years of unrestricted free agency, so that's not bad. No clauses that impacted his, ability to, things don't work out, be sent somewhere. But then, I started sort of following the conversation in C4 Discord as well as sort of through Twitter, and there's some very valid points being presented. This is a goaltender who had, I think back to the Corey Schneider experience with Vancouver. Corey got presented a starting job and a big deal, and then things didn't work out for a variety of reasons, not maybe Corey related, but goaltending related here in Vancouver. Goes off to New Jersey, and he's not the goaltender he was here in Vancouver. So there's part of me that does see some validity in people saying, are we certain this is the amount of money you want to tie up in this player? It could pay out. Like, if he's phenomenal, you've gotten some cheap years out of him. But if he's not phenomenal, you've maybe overpaid.
I mean, I think that about sums it up. I don't think there's anything to get wildly upset about. It's not crazy long. There's a few goaltenders who got signed very prematurely to long contracts.
Hey, how's Bobrovsky doing these days?
Yeah. I mean, ask LA how many years they have left of their goaltender being better than us. But yeah, I think it's a risk. It's a sizable risk. Not to mention the fact that we've kind of been dancing around here that his mentor in Vancouver,
not under contract,
reason behind Thatcher's success, Ian Clark has not been signed to a deal, and you got to think that was part of the negotiations. No, like, why wouldn't that come up in discussions from that?
It might be part of negotiations, but as we're starting to hear from Tom a little bit later, he discusses that teams, and he doesn't outright suggest anyone specific, but teams are looking for ways to save money, and it's not on the roster.
Definitely.
Not that the Canucks could save money on the roster because of their cap situation,
but yeah, we've seen it even on the roster, like, Canucks like trying to get a third goaltender. Now they finally got Seelov's back, but only because of the COVID situation.
Mm-hmm.
But ownership weren't willing to pay extra for that in terms of cash money. Yeah, obviously we're seeing Ian Clark hasn't got a new contract, neither has Travis Green. Obviously, those are concerns, but if I was Thatcher, like, I would definitely be saying, go to the ownership. I don't want to stay without knowing my future secure. And if I was Jim Benning, I would be saying, we've got to have this guy signed, because Thatcher Demko was kind of a mess when he came up to the Canucks, like, in terms of a technical standpoint. Like, Ian Clark has turned him around.
Well, and I mean, people are like, well, are we sure it's Ian? Look at what's happening to Jacob Markstrom in Calgary right now. Like, the one difference outside of the logo on the jersey is the fact that he doesn't have the goaltending coach he had here in Vancouver. Calgary's trying to play him hard, and maybe one might even suggest the team in front of him is actually better than the Vancouver. It's not getting the results that we saw here, at least in the last couple of seasons of Vancouver. So I think you're right. Ian Clark is definitely key to this sort of Thatcher Demko experience. And if he were to walk or be let to go somewhere else on his own, that introduces some variables for a Vancouver Canucks future in a crease that are concerning.
Definitely. And yeah, those numbers aren't good enough. They're stable and they look okay, but they aren't good enough that we can just, palm Thatcher off if it doesn't work out.
Yeah. Anyhow, I'm curious what you, our listeners' thoughts are on the Demko deal, or really how the Canucks and NHL handling the COVID situation. Let us know in C4 Discord, on the C4 text line, or on Twitter, obviously. But with the Vancouver Canucks, not able to practice and really focus on their skills to improve their game, they're probably looking for other avenues to really grow personally. And, honestly, you shouldn't be any different. The ICBA trains thousands of workers every year on everything from Excel spreadsheets to excavating trenches, from personal leadership skills to construction estimating, from fall protection to effective management skills, and 500 other courses. Online, on demand, webinars, and even COVID-safe in person, ICBA has an option for you and your busy lifestyle. Start climbing the corporate depth chart by sharpening your skills today. Check out icba.ca/courses.
Take hitting out of the game. You can't hit anymore, so don't do it.
The unsportsmanlike conduct, I want to get an explanation on that.
No kidding.
Because how do you get suspended for unsportsmanlike conduct?
Plus interference. There's no interference there. He had the puck.
Now, Madison never ever did that before. Now, why did he do it? That because he was mad.
Well, your early favorite for the Calder Trophy, that's for sure. Elias Pettersson, you might even say your early favorite for the Hart Trophy.
Just to get back to your question, Elias is going to play plenty. He didn't play. He's going to get a lot of power play time. And, yeah, I'm concerned about our offense. We lost 200-point players, and we've got to find a way to score.
So as we mentioned a segment ago, here in Half Full, Half Empty, we are pleased to be joined with a very special guest, Tom Mayonet, who you might know as at the Sport Market on Twitter. He is the person who is synonymous with business and sport, at least here in Vancouver, but I'm pretty sure across the country. But Tom, thank you for joining the longest running Canucks podcast in town.
Well, I'll tell you, it's my pleasure, Chris, Anna, to be on with you. And I'll tell you something, you guys should be really proud of it in terms of where you've taken C4 and the fact that you keep on staying fresh with it. You keep on loving it. And it comes across in everything you do, not only on this platform, but on Twitter as well. So it's a real pleasure to have the chance to talk C4 with you guys.
Awesome. Well, I mean, it's good hearing, such praise from someone such as yourself. Considering your background, I understand you might be in the radio biz at some point and have continued to remain there. So,
there might be some connection there. I'll tell you, it's so interesting. I consider myself very privileged to have had a heck of a lot of fun, Chris and Anna, in terms of, being involved in the business of sport. Since I was a little guy, 14 years old, working for a newspaper in the West Island of Montreal called the North Shore News, not the North Shore News that we all know in North Vancouver, but the North Shore News on the West Island of Montreal. And from there, had a chance to do some other community television, Barker Channel stuff for TSN. And then, of course, had the opportunity to be with Tennis Canada for 9.5 years, then the Raptors, then the Grizzlies, and all these years later, I'm still privileged to have my foot in the door, so to speak.
Awesome. Well, it's awesome having you join us on the show. And what we wanted to do is really talk to you about sort of as we said, the business and sport, to give some background, maybe pull the curtain back to our listeners. When we first started chatting, it was around the time that we saw the developments in the local sort of sports radio market. And our goal was originally to talk about that as a topic. But things over the past week specifically have really changed. And we thought we might pick your brain on that. And specifically, the possibility of fans returning to sporting events here in Canada. I believe you were actually in Edmonton, if I am correct, talking a little bit about a proposal that the Oilers had as to possibly getting fans back in the seats here in NHL rinks, this side of the border. I'm curious, with the recent development we've seen here with the Canucks, how strong does that possibility remain at this point, or was it even strong at all to begin with?
Well, first of all, Chris, it's a great question, and there's so many moving parts on it. Let me take a stab at it in a couple of different ways. I mean, first of all, I guess 4 weeks ago, I did have Tom Anselmi on the Sport Market, and TSN 1260 in Edmonton was one of the stations on our network carrying the interview, and he waxed with a lot of passion about the Oilers making a proposal to the Alberta Public Health Authority about allowing fans in the stands. Admittedly, 15% capacity at Rogers Place. So you're talking, less than a couple of thousand fans to begin with. But at least it was the first time that a Canadian NHL team or a Canadian professional sports team had actually put a proposal forward to the provincial health authority saying that, hey, they feel that they're ready to do this. And of course, it made sense if you think about it, guys. Edmonton has not only had the 2014 Stanley Cup tournament, where they really had Rogers Place, playing the starring role in the bubble with the conference finals, both of them, and the Stanley Cup final. But they also pulled off a very successful double IHF World Junior Hockey Championship, at the end of the year. So they had a lot of experience bubbled up, so to speak. They felt that their knowledge of the protocols and keeping things safe, that they would be a natural starting point for Canada in terms of professional sport franchises having fans in the stands. But, haven't really heard a lot about where they go next with it, simply because of what's happened with the numbers, a concern over the variance. And this is before the Vancouver Canucks have gotten into the pickle that they're in right now. So I don't think there's any question. If you look at this story, it's a big step back for those hoping to get closer to normalcy in Canadian professional sport and in North American professional sport. We know what's happening south of the border. Texas Rangers at Globe Life Field basically opened up the doors to 100% capacity. You had 9,000 fans at T-Mobile Park in Seattle to watch the Mariners home opener, and 9,000 fans watching the Jays go to overtime to beat the Yankees at Yankee Stadium. So it's happening south of the border. But I think what's happened with the Canucks will certainly give pause to any of the public health authorities and the federal government from fast tracking anything that they might have had in mind. But that's as we speak today. It's such a fluid situation that I would be hard pressed to sort of say that, hey, this is exactly what I think is going to happen, because I just think that there's still more uncertainty. We could, in a couple of weeks, have much better weather start. We could have the pace picked up in terms of vaccination, which, quite frankly, I've been disappointed as a Canadian to see the way or how slow it's been in terms of getting, Canadians vaccinated. I thought we'd be ahead of the curve, ahead of the United States and other countries, but we haven't been. And so now you've got this race going on between the vaccination and the variants providing some challenges, and they're going to be tough to sort of get out of the way. So I think it's going to happen. I'm an optimist, so my nature is to say that we're moving towards the light at the end of the tunnel. But boy, oh boy, I still think that tunnel is a long one.
Yeah, Tom, I'd be curious to just building on that about the power dynamics you see between the league and the provincial governments and the federal governments here in Canada, which seems to be quite a different relationship to what they have in the US. I mean, they've just got the quarantine pushed back to a week, but it took them 6+ months of asking. So how much give do you think there'll be on the part of governments and the league? And in terms of the power tussle there.
You know what, Anna? It's a very, very good question. And let's just say that this is a tale of two countries. The politics around the COVID-19 pandemic are very different in the United States than they are here in Canada. Because you've got several states that have pushed the envelope in terms of opening up their economies, and this goes back, 4, 6, 9 months in some cases, you've got a general political openness and tolerance for having fans in the stands. Remember that New York was one of the hotbeds for COVID-19 in the first 90 days. And now they've got socially distanced fans in the stands. I would have thought that they would have been one of the last state jurisdictions to go that way, but because so many other states, Texas, Florida, Georgia, have been knocking on the door, I think it's caused the federal government as well to not necessarily relax its approach, but certainly be tolerant of what was happening at the state level. Here in Canada, you don't really have a provincial renegade government. Even the Alberta government, you can't say renegade, because what they've wound up doing from a public health authority point of view gets the support of most scientists in terms of the way they've played it. So, but having said that, there will be continued pull and push, or a power tussle, as you describe, Anna, because all you need to do is go back to when the Vancouver Canucks and Canucks Sports and Entertainment had their bid in to be a hub city at last year's Stanley Cup tournament. Essentially, Dr. Bonnie Henry and the BC provincial government weren't prepared to cross a couple of lines in terms of potentially needing extra time for contact tracing if there were positive tests. NHL walked away from that, and we all know that it wound up being Toronto and Edmonton, which is really interesting when we're having this conversation, because at that time, the thought of having any bubbles south of the border simply didn't make sense. Even Vegas graciously pulled back simply because their numbers were spiking out of control. Toronto and Edmonton were two of the safest jurisdictions, along with Vancouver, in all of North America. So that ability to make sure that things are not only done right, but done the right way will continue to be very much a dynamic here. I don't think you're going to see in Canada any of the Canadian sports organizations playing hardball, whether it's at the league level or NHL sort of in Canada, or any of the individual franchises. So I just think, again, the numbers, the science are going to determine when it's safe to press the button here. And what's happened with the Vancouver Canucks over these past, 10 days certainly shows that we're not there yet. We're not in a place of, let's say, whimsy and carefree planning. A lot has to happen. As we mentioned just a few minutes ago, the pace on vaccination has to increase to the point where you're starting to get closer to herd immunity. And we need to keep the variants, including the P1 variant from Brazil, that is causing some issues apparently with some members of the Vancouver Canucks and their families. Those numbers have to be kept in check. I think that unless you start to see a lessening of the positive test results, no matter how much you want to quibble on their accuracy or what they actually reflect, but until you see those numbers politically get to a lower level, and you see the vaccinations get to a much higher level, and you also see let's say continued success of having kids in school and at classes when they get back full bore across all K9 and whatever it is. I think it's going to take a perfect proposal to get fans in the stands. I would suggest that Edmonton has as good a chance as anybody, although I know that it doesn't make sense when you look at the headlines in Ontario. But Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment have also been looking at trying to be designated as a safe zone. So we're going to see this push and pull. We're going to see the power tussle that you've described. I think, like a lot of hockey fans and a lot of Canadians who just want to get on not only with the business of sport, but the business of business and the business of life, it can't happen soon enough.
I guess, thinking about the business side a little bit more, one of the things that we are seeing specifically with the Vancouver Canucks, but also earlier with the Montreal Canadiens, is these delayed games, the schedule sort of questions that exist, especially here with Vancouver, where there, at this point in time, doesn't seem to be any sign that they'll be in a position to return to the ice. How will this impact sort of the NHL's economics, in so much that they're getting, at least in Canada, only TV revenues? And I can't imagine the decision to not schedule the games sits well with the rights holder in Rogers holding the TV rights. Like, what would the balance look like with the NHL? Is it a matter of they need to get the games played, or would they simply look at what games necessary to get the playoffs in gear?
Chris, it's a fascinating question, and it's one that I was focused on Saturday morning on the Sport Market on BNN Bloomberg 1410 Vancouver, which is now hosting the show here in Vancouver after the demise of TSN 1040, which I know we're going to talk about at the back end of this. But we talked about the fact that this is not only an issue of concern for the players, the coaches, and their families. And above all, that's what it is. It's a health scare. It's a health concern, especially because we know so little about the P1 variant and the Brazil variant. You don't want to scoff at anybody being infected, even a high performance athlete. And, certainly I mentioned on the show, I have concerns based on some of the long haul testimonials for those who have been impacted by COVID-19, including high performance athletes. You lose 1, 2, 3, 4% lung capacity, you're losing a heck of a lot as a high performance athlete. So again, I don't think anybody can take what's happening with the Vancouver Canucks seriously enough. And until such time as they're all clear and healthy and no longer, a couple of them apparently on IV, that's where the focus needs to be. Having said that, from a sport business point of view and a hockey business point of view, no question, this has got financial ramifications. You look at if the league wound up having to postpone enough games that there's just no way that they couldn't get to mid-May with a full 56 games being played, then you're looking at a couple of things. First of all, you're looking at Rogers with the league doing a negotiation in terms of any national broadcasts featuring the Canucks lost, and any of them would have to be rebated in some way because they've paid for, prorated version of the normal 82 game regular season. They've found ways to negotiate making up for that. Of course, that's where some of the decals and the helmets and stuff like that have come into play. But you're also looking at very expensive regional television rights, as Sportsnet Pacific has, with the Vancouver Canucks. You take 4 or 5 games, like let's just say they assuming that things go swimmingly enough that they're going to be returning and get back to play. You take 5 games, 6 games, or 10% of the schedule out. You're talking, a couple of $2-3 million, maybe $3.5 million of a hit there that would have to be made up in some way. Then you've got, of course, Sportsnet 650 having the radio rights. There'd be the same kind of recalibration there. And so it's, as you mentioned, in a year in which the Aquilini Investment Group and the family and Canucks Sports and Entertainment hasn't been able to take and depending on who you listen to and depending on how you define it in terms of ticket sales and related sales and revenues that come from having fans in the stands, it's already a tough situation for the Vancouver Canucks and for the ownership group. If they had to now start to give back some TV revenue, it would only exacerbate that. And then, of course, you've got just not only and I don't think it's as much of an issue as long as, the players get healthy towards the end of this week. But you look at the trade deadline and all of a sudden the Canucks, Jim Benning and the front office, they're a little bit handcuffed because, the thought of, trading someone who hasn't been given the all clear and you're not 100% sure what's going to happen with that player or how the player's been impacted by COVID-19, I just think it's going to be harder rather than easier for the Canucks to make any deals at the deadline. I'm not saying Jim Benning doesn't find a way to get it done, but if he does, it'll almost certainly be another Canadian team, and the pool will have been, limited that way. And then the last thing, and I know that it's a very entertaining debate for a lot of Canucks fans. What does this, gap in the season do to the cases that Travis Green as head coach and Jim Benning as general manager are trying to make to preserve their jobs, to retain their positions with the Vancouver Canucks? You take away some sample size, you're at least making the decision open to some wild card factors. So it's a messy situation. I can say with certainty that the league is not going to push back the beginning of its Stanley Cup playoffs and if they do, not by anything more than a week. And it's because NBC is on a hard stop. NBC, with the Tokyo 2021 Olympic Games happening this summer, has to see the Stanley Cup presented by a certain date. And so they're not going to let the Canucks' misfortune here push that back too far. I would think they're probably thinking about trying to meet halfway in terms of going to winning percentage to determine the Canucks' final spot, but trying to get some games in, but not forcing all of them, because it's going to be hard. I mean, look at what the Montreal Canadiens are going to do, and they were just off a week, maybe 10 days. They're looking at something like 19 games in 30 nights or something like that, or 35 nights. Like, that is a constant pattern of one game every 2 nights. So there's a lot of back-to-backs there. That's the thing that's going to be interesting for the Canucks to take a look at. But I think it's a hard stop, and if they can't get the games in, I think they'll go to winning percentage. Imagine, guys, if the Canucks were in playoff position, it would be an entirely different discussion. The fact that they're on the outside looking out, and the math is such that they're still alive technically, but it's a really hard road now for both Vancouver and Calgary to have any chance of trying to leapfrog over the Montreal Canadiens. So from that perspective, that's going to govern the league's thinking, and quite frankly, it's probably going to govern what the Canucks petition the league with.
Yeah. I mean, we do talk a lot about on the show. We've talked about the pandemic saving the Canucks season last year and saving Jim Benning's job. And obviously as it's rolled on and gone into variations, it's made it more difficult. I would be curious just to talk a little bit more about the broadcasters, because there's a situation going on in Australia right now where one of the broadcasters is suing Cricket Australia for breach of contract. For the quality of the cricket and the amount of cricket they've played due to the virus. Do you ever see anything like that happening here, or does just TV rule all and kind of they'll get what they want from the league?
Anna, I've learned in the business of sport over the years, you never say never. And sometimes, even if it's almost never, you just never say never. You never rule it out entirely. So I'm not going to say that there's no chance of any of the Canadian networks or the American networks ever litigating against the National Hockey League, for games lost. The point that you made that's so interesting and fascinating to me is with the Australian cricket debate, the quality of play. And, I've brought forward this thought over the last 6 months that, even though you in certain cases had real spikes in terms of television, especially when the Canadian teams, there were 6 of 7 Canadian teams in the 2014 Stanley Cup tournament. And you literally had hockey going from 10 a.m., 9 a.m. in the morning till 9, 10 o'clock at night. The numbers those first couple of weeks were really strong. I think there was just so much pent-up demand. But in general, and this applies to Masters golf being away from its regular tournament date of April, playing in October, November last year, those numbers were really poor. And you have most leagues, with the exception of the National Football League, that you've seen the numbers down. And I argue one of the reasons why the numbers have gone down is it isn't the same for people to watch hockey with no fans in the stands. It's just a completely different experience. I mean, sport is so tribal, it's so primal that you're more attracted to something to watch it on TV when you see the white towels, when you see the cheering, when you see or you're hearing the music and the fans trying to egg the players on. Without that, it's a little bit sterile. Like, I think they've done a good job and in some cases a remarkable job of staging, and the NHL deserves credit for what they did in Edmonton and Toronto, but it's still not the same thing. And I think after a while, sports fans have sort of, slid off. So that point about the quality, it could still lead. I don't think it will go to litigation because people don't want to have that black mark against them the next time the TV rights or the radio rights are up for grabs. But I do think you're going to see some discussion about what happens moving forward and whether or not there's some consideration about not just the fact that some games may have been lost, but that the television spectacle of NHL hockey has been changed for sure here in Canada and even in the United States jurisdictions where they've had some fans in the stands.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Thinking sort of back on sort of the revenue side, and arguably Canada has been the fuel in the NHL's tank, but then I wouldn't also claim to know if gate revenue is all that important to Canadian teams specifically. I know, like with the Canadian Football League, I'm a fan of the BC Lions. Gate revenue is a very important metric for the success of the Lions. I'm a Whitecaps season ticket holder, and again, I think gate revenue very, very much an important metric. But if the Canadian franchises continue to lack the opportunity for gate revenue, and I don't know if it's fair to suggest there's going to be a possibility that maybe return to action in the fall will have sort of a depressed gate based on vaccination and what have you. But is this something that these Canadian teams can weather? Like, do they have enough money in the bank, whether it be from the Seattle expansion fee, or I don't know how the NHL's TV deal in the US gets sort of tossed around? Or is this a concern that maybe us as Canadian hockey fans should consider, that teams might be in a tougher place as a result?
Well, it's interesting, Chris. There's a lot of layers to that question there, and I'll try to sort of unpack it as well as I can. The fact that the TV numbers are as bullish as they are, the fact that the National Hockey League not only has a deal that's now paying at 500 million Canadian dollars a year for Rogers to have national rights, and that doesn't include the various regional rights that Rogers has dibs on, including the Vancouver Canucks. But it's more than that. You've got now what was 200 million US dollars a year through NBC. You've now got 400 million for basically a little bit more than half of the US national TV package. So the NHL has already doubled the revenues that it and its 31 and soon to be 32 member teams get from American television. I would suggest the other shoe will drop anywhere from 200 to 300 million dollars, so that they'll be at 700 million US. On a per capita basis, that's still a lot less than what Rogers is paying for the Canadian rights. And that just shows that, again, hockey, as you mentioned, Chris, the economic breadbasket is still very much Canada. About 40% of overall league revenues are still connected directly and indirectly to the 7 Canadian franchises and the markets in between. And so in terms of, the question of weathering, I'd be very, very surprised if any of the Canadian teams, with the possible exception of the Ottawa Senators, have a restructuring as a result of this. And by restructuring, I mean some kind of event, some kind of sale where Eugene Melnyk, gives up, throws in the white towel, so to speak, on the Ottawa Senators, especially because there isn't a single season ticket holder who wants to see him continue to hold on to the franchise.
Yes.
And certainly there's also pressure on the Aquilini family because they've had elements of their business portfolio, certainly negatively impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. But there's too much upside not to hang in there. And that's why I do believe that every Canadian franchise will find a way to weather the storm. They are better equipped than the vast majority of the American franchises south of the border. That's where I have some concerns. The Arizona Coyotes, a new owner comes in and he's dealing with, not being able to sell tickets. Now that's not too different from the Arizona Coyotes normally, but now you're basically saying 0 instead of, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12,000 fans in an 18,000 seat building. So I do think that the smart business people who are NHL owners here in Canada, including the corporate, juggernaut that is Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment with Rogers and Bell and Larry Tannenbaum, holding the equity there, that they are going to find a way to get through this. But it certainly has caused for the enterprise value to drop. And that's the thing. Yes, it's been a tough, 13 months for the Aquilini ownership group of the Vancouver Canucks. But when you look at the fact that they bought the whole thing for 250 million Canadian, and it's now valued at north of, still, even though it's gone down a little bit, it's still worth, according to Forbes magazine, more than 700 million US dollars. There's quite a bit of inflation of equity that they've been able to gain. And again, they're too smart. They have made their money by buying low and selling high. They've got no intention of being forced to sell low here. I would be really surprised if that happens. Again, never say never, but I do think that they've got the capacity to go forward. The troubling thing for fans is, what does it mean in terms of what they spend outside of the salary cap? We know it's legislated what you can spend in the salary cap, but the really good organizations spend at least as much around the salary cap in terms of player development, scouting staffs, sport medicine and science, the degree of services that are provided. And that's where I know for fact several Canadian teams and at least a dozen NHL teams have, had the bean counters sort of take a look at where they're going to save money. And hey, you look in the case of the Vancouver Canucks, they haven't technically replaced Trevor Linden, so that salary is off the books. So I think you're going to see some pressure for some cost cutting, and who knows how real the issue of money is. But it sure seems that it has been a big factor in terms of not getting Travis Green extended. Who knows what happens on that front if the two sides can't, agree on a reasonable number because of the COVID-19 economy and how limited it is for the ownership.
Yeah, I'd be interested to just get one last thing on economic recovery before we get into radio. Do you think that that will end up having an effect on player contracts? We saw kind of Ryan Suter, Zach Parise's free agency, where they just got those massive contracts, and since then they've just been gone up and up exponentially. And I'm wondering if you see similar effect the other way from COVID, and how long it will all take to shake out from that perspective.
Anna, I do see impact. In fact, I've already seen impact, and I think the two of you would also be able to, cite a few examples. Like, for example, the one that Canucks fans hate to talk about, Tyler Toffoli. When you look at what he was signed by Marc Bergevin, in some people's books, that either means that Marc Bergevin should be general manager of the year for being able to get a guy who was scoring for the Canucks, but also has been scoring at his pace for the Montreal Canadiens. That's a bargain basement deal. And Tyler Toffoli and other free agents saw that you really didn't have 31 teams knocking on your door. It was maybe a third of the teams were basically told, look, keep on spending to the cap, keep on doing what you need to do to make that happen. But I do think that you're going to see another year or two of at least a funky market when it comes to player contracts. I'm fully confident that you're not seeing a collapse of the market. You're not seeing the bubble bursting. But I think it's going to take a year or two post-COVID to have all the revenue streams back in line that would allow at the next sitting of the CBA, which fortunately for the league and the PA is number of years off. I don't think you're going to see. Let me put it this way: you'll still see the odd silly contract that makes people say what, but I don't think you're going to see as many of them. And even this past year has shown that in terms of the amount and volume of free agents assigned and by which teams they were signed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's actually, wrap things up by talking a little about radio. And I was going to ask you, start what the future looks like, but I thought I maybe missed a question here. Let's talk a little bit about the past. One, I'm older than some of our listeners are, and I remember the world of sports talk radio that existed in Vancouver before sports talk radio was a thing. Like I have memories of growing up listening to the Lions and the Canucks on NW, where I had, Tommy Larscheid, helping me fall asleep, because back then I kid you not listened to the Walkman radio, which I know some of you young people may not realize what it is, but I listened to the Walkman and I listened to the Canucks, and that was at bed. So I'm curious, like, what inspired you and your group to explore the world of sports talk radio in the Vancouver market, and really what made Team 1040 become a thing?
It's interesting because that question has been on my mind a lot over the last couple of months since the end of the road for what was Team 1040 and finished as TSN 1040. Certainly February 9th was Black Tuesday in a number of ways, not just for sports radio in Vancouver, but also in Hamilton, where TSN 1150 was closed down, and in Winnipeg, where TSN 1290, both of which carried the sport market. So I felt that I sort of lost three families that day. But to go back to that period of 1999, 2000, and into 2001, you wind that clock back, and really NW and other what are now chorus radio stations were doing great jobs as homes of the respective CFL franchises. NW, as some Canucks fans will still remember, also carried the Lions and the Vancouver Canucks for many years. They were news sports talk in a very, very big way. Certainly the loss of the Canucks rights to Team 1040 back in the day has led to a reconfiguration of CKNW for now. I definitely think that there's smoke where there's fire, or there's fire where there's smoke, however you want to put it, and that there's a real good look being taken at the Lions returning to NW. So, sports radio, if you define it as team rights, I think is going to be around for a long time terrestrially. Yeah. But back in that day, it was such a virgin landscape to do sports talk radio. Dan Russell, who, is Hall of Fame worthy in so many respects for what he's done with sports talk, he really was the guy for a number of years. Tony Gallagher did it. Dave Pratt did it. And they all did it in ways that made me feel that, hey, Vancouver is a market that could do 24 hours of this. And the reason why I was so predisposed to it, guys, is that I lived in Toronto for 15 years. And in my 9.5 years with Tennis Canada and my just over a year with the Toronto Raptors before doing a couple of years with the Vancouver Grizzlies, I was on what was then the Fan and is now the Fan 590. I was on sometimes 5 or 6 times a week. And the shows that were basically bonded to sports fans, like Bob McCowan's, they became big deals in the marketplace. And I thought that if Toronto could be a great home for sports radio, then Vancouver could be, and more. And I remember the late great Carsoni, Paul Carson, and myself, David Stadnik, Bob Smart, the Watt brothers. There were a lot of people saying, "Are you guys crazy? There's no way that you're going to be able to fill 24 hours of content." And as we know, that is the absolute opposite. And so I felt that because there was such a good sport market in Vancouver, that sports radio would work. And I do think that demographically, the reason why TSN 1040 and Team 1040 before it became so bonded to the community is how polarized this marketplace is. It's almost perfect for sports talk radio. The saying is, the more polarizing you are as a host in sports talk radio or as a station, the better a job you're doing and the greater your ratings. If you're all, vanilla, all sort of positive or all negative, it won't work. You've got to have that sort of Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader type of dynamic. And I saw that in this market. I saw a really polarized market on any issue, not just sports, but, there's a lot of polarization here, and it's reflected in the political environment as well. So that's what I thought was, and Paul and David and the others who made it happen They thought it was a compelling way to move forward. We launched the station, which I'm very, very proud of. But we also felt that it was important to make sure that there's strong corporate, let's say, infrastructure, and hence the deal with Chum to have Team 1040 part of the Team network of stations, and then wind up being rebranded by TSN 1040. I don't think anybody can deny that at the end, during the pandemic and maybe even before it, there was a lot of money being spent. It's an expensive format. It's the most expensive radio format of any of them, because no other radio stations have to pay for broadcast rights the way a sports radio station does. And no other station has to send people on flights throughout North America all year long. So it is an expensive format, no question. But at the end of the day, TSN was for TSN 1040 and Team 1040 before it was definitely an artistic success because of how bonded it was with the community. And I'm so hoping moving forward that with the torch being passed to Craig McEwen and Rogers Sportsnet 650, that they can take advantage of the situation and build a similarly strong bonded offering, because I think Vancouver will continue to lap it up. Despite what we see happening with some decentralization, I think sports radio's got still some legs to it.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, but Vancouver seems to be a sort of law unto itself and rather strange market in terms of its relationship, particularly with sports radio. And I'd be interested to hear your take on that, having come from sort of the team background in Toronto as well. I can't imagine another market where you see like a radio station without rights beat out its competition, or you see a radio station start a movement that goes and reaches the team, like for example Shotgun Jake did with Halford and Bruff. So how does that compare, like Vancouver, and how do you see that going forward?
Anna, those are at least two great questions there in one. And let me answer them as two different questions. What you saw with what Mike Halford and Jason Bruff did with the Shotgun Jake thing was you saw how it is such a conduit to that primal, the primal nature, that tribal nature, people wanting to be able to invest emotionally in their team and in individual hockey players. And despite, all of the grief and all of the debate, and again, all the polarization on Jake Virtanen, most Canucks fans, whether they would admit it or not, desperately wanted to see this Abbotsford boy do well with the big club. And that's why Shotgun Jake was not just a ritual, it was almost like a marketing of hope that he could turn things around to the point where people would be having shooters at every Canucks game, or the beer shots at every game. So that shows the special bondedness between a lot of radio listeners in the Vancouver market and the station, but also their teams. And there's it's interesting. Some people have said that Vancouver is one of the toughest sport markets in the country, and it's tougher to sell tickets in BC than it is in Alberta. I mean, in Calgary and Edmonton, I would say the sport business assessment is that people buy tickets there. In Vancouver, you need to be sold tickets just because of even more variety of things to do. And there's also a little bit of a blasé-ness that a team has to do something to earn loyalty. That's more than, let's say, teams in a market like Toronto. I'll just use Toronto as an example. Under Harold Ballard, for years, he invested almost nothing in his payroll and in the product, but people kept on packing Maple Leaf Gardens. Here in Vancouver, when you didn't have good teams and you didn't have a good product, even though it's a hockey mad city, you had 8,000 fans at Pacific Coliseum. In fact, there were a couple of years in the late 1990s, early 2000s, before the 12 season undefeated, sold out streak began, where you had less season ticket holders for the Canucks than he had for the Vancouver Grizzlies, and the Grizzlies were on their way out of town. So I think that West Coast polarization, it makes for great sports radio, but it also makes for the fans, the teams having to work really hard to maintain fan loyalty compared to maybe some other markets where people are a little bit more, let's say, forgiving. Let's put it that way. On the other thing about radio rights, you can go through the 125 major league markets who have NFL teams, NBA teams, Major League Baseball teams, NHL teams, MLS teams, and you see a few cases where the non-rights holder radio station is beating out the station or stations that have the official play-by-play rights, but they're beating them out on the sheer strength of personality, because the program directors there have invested heavily in personality. And I would say that broadcast rights are important for a radio station, but the talk show hosts and the personalities are even more important. And you look at KJR south of the border. They've basically been not only the ratings leader, but the economic leader among the 2.5, 3 sports radio stations in the Seattle market, even though they've tended not to have rights to the major Seattle franchises. So, in this particular case here, I think every station has growing pains. And for anybody who's been a critic of Sportsnet 650 in their first 3 or so years, remember, it took time for Team 1040 to build that connection and to figure out that although they wanted to pursue the Canucks rights and they wound up pursuing them and getting them, the real emphasis is on building the personalities, being interactive, being immersive, giving fans an opportunity to engage. And I do think with the end of the era for Team 1040 / TSN 1040, the group at Sportsnet 650 has got the opportunity to have the best of both worlds. Have the rights to the major properties that they want to have, and also build out the rest of a lineup that will, keep people bonded from 6 a.m. in the morning until, after 6 p.m. at night.
Just sort of taking that a step further, we had sort of talked about this before we click record, how what I call the digital media space has been around for quite some time. C4 has existed as a podcast quite a long time. I often joked that we were the layman's experience of what you might get within sports talk radio, but we were never ever considering ourselves to be competitors. Yet now we're seeing, with obviously the transition with TSN 1040, many of the former hosts moving into sort of the digital space, like Rob Fay's been knocking it out of the park with his product. Sakaris and Price are in the digital space, though they're kind of doing a little bit of both. And then we now see the return to not sports talk radio, but sports talk TV with Donnie and Dollywall over on Czech TV in the Paul Carson studio, which was definitely a nice nod. And as someone, again, going back the years here, I grew up on Sports Page. Like, I love that every night I could sit there and hear about them talking about a goal being scored in the top shelf right up where Daddy keeps the fine liquor. And it was something about that experience, as if these were sports broadcasters speaking to me in a language that I understood. In fact, I have been a long proponent. Every so often around the holiday season and Christmas, I want Sports Page back, if only for Ewing with the Page. It's one of the reasons why C4 is what it is.
You're not the only one.
So with this transition to this digital media space, like, how much of an impact is it going to have on that terrestrial radio experience or television experience? Or are they still going to be complementary, maybe just in a different way?
You know what? I think it's such a fascinating question that's going to take at least a couple more years, to figure out where the trajectory is going. And let me answer it this way, Chris. The decentralization, the fragmentation that you're talking about in terms of the way people consume their sports radio, that's been happening across the board in terms of the way people are consuming their music radio, their talk radio, and it is basically causing a lot of fragmentation. We often talked about going from, let's say, 6 US and Canadian television networks and a 6-channel universe to the 500 channel universe. And I was like, whoa, boy, that is really fragmented. Well, now you can make the argument that you're in a 6 billion channel universe where everybody can be a broadcaster. And what I mean by that is even having a Twitter account or a Facebook account or Instagram or TikTok, gives individuals that democratic ability to express their opinion that was just not around in 1994. And it's hard to believe that the Vancouver Canucks' second of 3 Stanley Cup runs happened about a year before the internet era began. And of course, we saw 2011, that was definitely internet era, but still early stages social media side. So now you've got in 2021, the forces that were affecting the general economy of radio and television, affecting sports radio from within. And what I mean by that is, before it was external competitors, now you've got a lot of cross-pollination potentially happening here, where you've got really good programming happening on an on-demand basis or on a streamed basis that will, challenge and compete with Sportsnet 650 and whoever is investing in sport television in the marketplace for listeners and for viewers. So what I will say is this: I think that terrestrial radio has some legs, as I mentioned earlier. It's not going tomorrow, despite some of the doomsaying that has gone on. And I'm saying that because you've still got too much interconnectivity between the telecoms and the telecoms as publicly traded companies and the telecoms as owners of professional sport franchises, and as owners of professional sport rights. One of the things that I believe, and I've said to James Stewart of Bell Media that I don't think that Bell Media and its decisions in Hamilton, Winnipeg, and Vancouver paid enough attention to the value of cross promotion, what a sports radio station can do to drive people to your television rights. CFL and TSN is a big staple, and it's a very big success story. And so we'll have to see whether I'm right or wrong on that, or if I'm barking up the wrong tree. But I do believe that in most markets, the owners and the principals and the stakeholders want to have that cross promotion, want to see a strong sports radio station that is broadcast. What the Sakaris and Prices and the Rob Fays and the Don Taylor and Rick Dollywalls and others are doing is still narrow casting. It's great narrow casting, and I've got absolutely no doubt that they're going to be really, really successful in what they're doing. Hence, their connection, their relationship with the marketplace. But I don't think that very soon they'll be able to command the broadcast audience of what a TSN 1040 had up until February 9th, and what a Sportsnet 650 can grow into moving forward. Now, what has to happen moving forward is, again, sports radio can't just show up and think that people will come. They've got to give that reason to put it on your preset, so to speak, speaking old school, and worthy of your laptop, in terms of streaming. But I think that, for most fans, they like the idea, and TSN 1040 proved this up until a couple of months ago. They love being part of that kind of a conversation. You go back just a few years to Dave Pratt, Don Taylor, and the poker gate, and that was talked about for not just days, but for weeks.
It still is.
And it's regarded as one of the most iconic moments in broadcast history. Look, there's going to be some great stuff coming up from my former colleagues who I'm so excited for them. I'm so happy. But I do think that it would be premature to signal the death knell for terrestrial radio. What you will see, however, is more and more sponsors investing in places that they wouldn't have thought of before. I mean, I think C4, can have an opportunity to command some sponsorship interest moving forward, and that might not have been the case, 10 years ago or 8 years ago when you really began in earnest. What I will say is, I think that there's room for something also in between, where you have a Sakaris and Price as a podcast, as an afternoon streaming show, and also the opportunity for them to have a video version of it, which they fully plan on doing, and potentially an opportunity for them to have 1 hour or more of their podcast broadcast on terrestrial radio somewhere in Vancouver. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I think that there's room for that. And it's almost like that intermediate phase where you're still getting broadcasting, even though it's being done narrowcast. Rob Gray, who I've got so much respect for, and he's a good friend. Of course, he took TSN 1040 to big levels, not only here in Vancouver, but other TSN radio stations across the country, including 1050 in Toronto, 1150 in Hamilton. To me, he's a programming a genius. He is through North Beach Agency, Rob Reese's very innovative company and dynamic company. They basically are taking the Dreger and the Ray and Dregs podcast, and it's been placed on TSN radio stations across the country. That's great cross promotion for a podcast. So I think you're going to see that little in between period continue to happen. And just the last thing I'll say is, I think it's a testament to everybody who's been involved with Team 1040, TSN 1040, Sportsnet 650, and even Mojo in between, and all those at Chorus Entertainment and CKNW over the years, who have made a lot of sports fans be sports radio fans and sports television fans and sports broadcast fans, that you're going to see some really good numbers. I think numbers that may on a per capita basis be the best in the country for Sakaris and Price, for Donnie and Dolly, the team on Czech television, for not only The Nation with Rob Fay, but also Sports Bar Radio. I think you're going to see even more talent express themselves that way. And I'll tell you, the early financial analysis would be that, hey, there's no reason not to be bullish on any of these platforms because of the sponsors that they've already signed up, and that goes from Rob Fay right across the board to Sakaris and Price.
Yeah, you did mention the sponsorship part about C4. Our friends ICBA stepped up and connected with us, soon after developments at 1040. So, I mean, for us, that there is a positive related there. Obviously, I would have rather the 1040 still be around, but you mentioned sort of how we're in this sort of intermediate stage. I grew up where I got inspired by listening to watching Sports Page, listening to Dan Russell and Sports Talk, and it sort of got me this idea that I could create a podcast. And yet there are those like Chris Faber and David Quadrelli with Canucks Conversation, who have, like Chris himself has said, that when he worked in the mill, C4 was in his ears, and it was our podcast that inspired him to do what he's doing. And I think it's really about what those before have led to allow for us today to do. And I think we're seeing this evolution and this embracement of this sort of digital transformation that's taking place as being a positive. I know from my perspective, people are like, oh my goodness, Chris, how's C4 going to survive now that, you're competing against Sakaris and Price? We never were.
Yeah.
We were best complementary, because I would encourage you, if you like them, listen to them. If you don't, listen to them anyway, give them a shot. But that's no different than I would say, go listen to 650, right? It's really about consuming the information that's available and connecting with the community that you want to feel part of.
What you've just said is such an important thing. And I'll just, very quickly, I know we're probably up against the C4 clock, and I so appreciate the conversation with you guys. But, I always made the argument when I was with the Toronto Raptors as the first executive back in the mid 1990s, and we did some assessment and some projections on this. People were saying, how can a market like Toronto, accommodate another NBA team, like another professional sports team? And I made the argument that as long as there was a compelling effort to put a good product, that what happens is you don't see the Raptors taking a piece away from the Leafs. You see the pie getting bigger because more people are turned on by the entertainment. And of course, that's exactly what happened with the Raptors. It wound up being more more entertainment than sports in the early years, but it made fans of an entire new generation. And now there's people, especially, younger fans. The Raptors are Toronto's team. Baby boomers still very much, in the corner of the Toronto Maple Leafs, but the pie overall demographically is bigger than it's ever been. And to what you just said about what inspired you, Chris, and for you and Anna to continue to do the work that you're doing, that's going to happen over and over and over again. And I think it's even more likely that you're going to see more talent, and you're going to see the pie of sports talk and sports opinion and sports commentary in Vancouver and in British Columbia, and of course around the world, because you're able to do it that way. I think you're going to see it grow because of what we've seen happen. The pie will be bigger despite the absence of TSN 1040. I've got no doubt that 5 years from now, as many people, if not more, will be consuming sports broadcast, sports radio in one form or another. And, I know that they deserve credit just for how quickly they've been able to make these moves. But each and every one of them, Rob Fay, who was first out of the gates, Donnie and Dolly, who debuted today on Czech TV, and Sakaris and Price, who officially hard launch it tomorrow, April 6th, each and every one of them will drive even more talent into the field and make younger versions of Light Force, so to speak, want to do what you're doing, sort of your own mini me's, Chris, wanting to do that. And I'll tell you, what's interesting to me is the glue that I think will form a great community around all of this. Look at the Jeff Pattersons and the Thomas Drances and the others who are going to be on each other's shows. That will only increase the audience moving forward, and certainly it's I think it's a very positive turn of events. And as I said, I'm just so excited for them. We had a lot of response on Saturday on the Sport Market on BNN Bloomberg 1410 radio in Vancouver when Matt and Blake came on for about 15 minutes. You can go to the Twitter account and download it. You can go to the website and download it. They were spectacular. They, like Donnie and Rick Dollywall and Rob Fay, they know how to engage listeners. And as long as people are doing that, I think the pie can grow even bigger than it is right now.
Awesome. Well, again, sorry to take up all this time. This has been a wonderful conversation. And, Tom, for our listeners, which I imagine everyone knows where to find you, but just in case there's one or two that don't, where might they be able to locate you if they want to listen to you more?
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Chris and Anna, for having me on, and keep on doing what you guys love doing. You're an important part of the landscape. And again, not only this platform, but what you put out there on Twitter and Instagram. Just keep that all going. Follow us at the Sport Market. That's THE Sport Market on Twitter. The best place to find the show here in Vancouver is on BNN Bloomberg Radio 1410. It's Saturday mornings from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. We're very fortunate to be on 3 other radio stations in British Columbia: CFAX 1070 in Victoria, AM 1150 in Kelowna, Radio NL 610 AM in Kamloops, and a total of 11 radio stations across the country, including the 4 remaining TSN radio stations. You can Google search the Sport Market on iHeartRadio .ca. It'll take you right to our show page, and you can find out more details, including the podcasts that are posted there after every show on Saturday mornings, and other audio cuts. And then, of course, we're very privileged to have the opportunity every Saturday to be in the pages of the Vancouver Sun and online at vancouversun.com with our Bulls and Bears commentary, where we try and identify the week's biggest winners and losers in the business of sport. And certainly anybody wants to reach out by email, I'm at tom@emblematica.name. That's the private practice, the boutique marketing, branding company that Anthony Abrahams and I are having a lot of fun with, after all these years. So for anybody who's listening to you, it would be an honor to have them also listen and find the sport market.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Tom.
Thanks for your
We're going to take
insight.
ourselves a short break here. You're listening to the C4 Canucks Hockey Podcast on CanucksHockeyBlog.com on the Full Press Coverage Network.
He liked to say the F word.
Oh, then get the here then. Okay, see ya.
Is going to have the F word on it.
I wish I could give you an explanation about it. I can't. You, out of here.
You said the F word, Dad.
You called me the F word.
Oh my goodness. We could have had a show with just Tom. That was wonderful.
The insight Tom gave was just phenomenal. Honestly, I had a few questions held back because we just kind of ran up against it time-wise. But yeah, just so detailed and thought-provoking, I thought.
Yeah. And, in fact, we could, I'm sort of thinking about this, but we could have actually had two segments with Tom. We could have had, half full, half empty, where we sort of talk about what's going on with the business of sport. And then we could have the F word about what happened with the sports radio in Vancouver. But, it was a phenomenal conversation. We're going to have to get Tom back at some point. I mean, again, friend of the show now, because he's been on once, but we'll get him back talking a little bit about everything he knows. Because that's the cool thing. He's so experienced within the world of sports, especially in Canada, obviously with Tennis Canada, the Raptors, the Grizzlies. I want to say he was even involved with sort of the lacrosse side, if memory serves me correct, like the Vancouver Voodoo, which is eons ago, but sports radio. But no, with the F word, we actually have a much different candidate to talk about. And if you happen to be in C4 Discord, you probably already know who that is. It's Damien Cox. Now, why might Damien Cox be our focus of the F word? Well, it's because of this tweet. And it was actually a retweet. So on April 3rd, IMAC had shared that the NHL wanted the Canucks to play a full 56 games, but 4 in a row with Ottawa might not mean anything. Damien took that, he retweeted by saying, the question then becomes, are you handicapping those playoff-bound teams by forcing them to play against a Van team that's more rested than it otherwise would be? This is a complex problem. What the actual F?
Yeah, this is the guy that kind of makes you believe in nominative determinism.
Those are two big words that I need a dictionary to explain.
Well, that's a treat for later. That's a thinker. Yeah, I just don't understand why you would, one, think that's an appropriate thing to think, and then two, just take that step forward and broadcast that thought.
Well, not just broadcast, double down, triple down, quadruple down before slightly walking it back.
Oh, just baby steps back. He's just stubbornly stuck to his very insensitive, approach. And you just think, just read the room. There's players going down like flies, and you're questioning whether they're really sick.
Well, and so if you, again, I'm not asking that you, our listeners, go forth and read the variety of points that he was conversing with, because he was holding his own as best as he could. But he talked about how, it's not very clear that the players are even sick. And then a friend of the show, Patrick Johnson, replies, nah, dude, they totally are. I've reported on this. This has been clear. You made this take when it's been quite clearly communicated that the Vancouver Canucks have many players, multiple players who are in current bad shape. And that's sort of when he started to maybe walk back. But he had like Eddie Lack call him out. Eddie's like, I've had this. I have it in great health, and it's knocked me on my butt. And Damien, who is like, well, I know Eddie, I know, you might know this, but I'm like, essentially I'm doubling down. And then Eddie goes, claps him back one more time. Damien's response, no, I'm not going to talk to you. You have a good night. Like, this is the thing. You just went and dug yourself into a hole, and you think that you could play the I'm going to play the high card here. Like,
I mean, I think it became abundantly clear when he tried to claim that when he was tweeting, no one knew the extent.
Oh, BS.
And that was just him saying, I'm wrong. I don't want to admit I was wrong because it makes me look like a horrible person.
Yeah. I don't obviously feel it's a good thing to be blocked by people on Twitter. Like, I mean, I've talked about this on the show. I've been blocked by like Kevin Weeks, and I do not have an idea why. Because I'd like to think when I have a conversation, I'm respectful. I never make it personal. I don't attack people. And yet I'm genuinely surprised that I'm not blocked by Damian Cox. Mind you, I don't know if I'd ever encounter, like, I wouldn't reply to him. Like, I wouldn't even engage, because it's a no-win situation. You're engaging with someone who's so entrenched in their beliefs that they truly don't care. And what they're doing is they're trying to use you to help, in turn, elevate their own message. And for me, it's just, when I saw it, it's not because I follow him. It's because the number of people who drop that hell of a take into my Twitter feed.
But yeah, it's definitely tone deaf. And I don't think it's us being Vancouver hysterical. What about us?
Oh, no.
I think, to so quickly move to a position where you're asking about how this affects teams' playoff chances when there are Canucks getting IVs,
even then, there's a different path you could take. You could present this as, it's a complex situation, how this impacts teams who might have playoff chances now. Like, hey, we thought we were going to be able to get a win out this game, and that win might elevate us, or, we might have to play multiple games ourselves. Like, he could have presented it in a way that it's a complex situation that pertains to scheduling impacts, right? He could have said that, oh yeah, now a team like, Toronto has to play more games as a result, or something along those lines. And it's hard to argue with that, because that's true. That's the reality of the situation. But his takes, no, man, this team's going to be rested.
Yeah. I mean, even if there were, even if the vast majority of players were just in COVID protocol and were not at all suffering, it's not a benefit to be off for weeks, not able to practice.
No.
I mean, maybe it's a benefit for Tanner Pearson to get healthy. That's the only player I can see.
Yeah, true. Although, isn't Tanner in protocol?
I'm not sure.
I'm trying to think of the list. I don't have it in front of me.
I don't have the list either. I don't believe he was at the rink.
Okay.
Was he? But I don't know that for sure. So please do not.
Yeah. Well, no, and I should have had the list of those in protocol in front of me. I don't. Regardless, it's just a hell of a take, and it actually got me thinking. I saw a number of people drop similar takes about the Canadians being rested, and I never really thought about that. I mean, I didn't support it, but I didn't so adversely react to it. So maybe there is sort of the Vancouver centricity to my thinking here. But any team that is impacted by COVID-19, there's no rest involved. Like right now, my household's safe for the most part. We're healthy right now. The amount of stress that I'm currently experiencing, and that's how I'm dealing with it. Like, this is not restful. Now put the players in the position that their friends, their family members, people in their own household who they currently are self-isolating with could be affected by this. And the amount of strain that's been introduced in their lives. This is just a horrible take.
Yeah, just to be 100% clear, no Tanner Pearson and no Pedersen on the list. So
I'm glad one of us, chose to look things up to actually get the right information. I could have done that too, but I was just too lazy to type on my keyboard. Anyhow, again, curious what your thoughts are. C4 Discord, obviously, discord.io/C4 podcast. The C4 text line. You can get a text message this week, but it's 604-200-6201. That's 604-200-6201. Text message or voicemail, and you can guarantee it'll be played in an upcoming show. If you drop us a text message, tell us if you'd like who you are. Otherwise, we just have to accredit texts to the anonymity that they provide. But yeah, this has been a pretty long show. Longer than we had actually planned on it being, but I still think phenomenal nonetheless. Tom, great guest. As I said, we'll have to get him back on. And the cool thing is we've got another pretty awesome guest lined up. Like C4 is doing some crazy stuff, and I am so glad that y'all are along for the ride. We're breaking out of our own little box. Not to suggest we were in one, but I like that you and I are starting to explore different voices here, Anna.
Yeah, me too. It's been great. I mean, Tom was an excellent guest. Definitely a different take on, the media landscape, and hopefully our guests, as they come up, will provide even more different avenues and ways of looking at the sport of hockey.
Yeah. And that's, really something I continue to sort of hammer on sort of every few episodes, but we are trying to present voices that you don't otherwise get from all of the other Canucks podcasts. Like there was someone today who had recommended someone else starting a podcast as a career shift, sort of sarcastically, because there aren't too many. And the person who received that recommendation said, I don't think, there's much money to be involved. And I agreed. I vouched.
Yeah.
If you're going to start a Canucks podcast, don't go into it thinking you're going to make it rich. You might, but
I mean, no, it's Mark Maron here. Like, even the successful sports hockey podcasts aren't making big bucks here.
No, but the thing about it is that many of us who do exist in sort of the Canucks podcast space, we often sort of have the same voices because we all want to hear from the same people. Like, we want to hear from Sat. We want to hear from, PJ or Thomas Drance or whomever. And we'll always have our friends of the show back. But we're wanting to sort of add to the number of friends that we have. And
more friends.
Yeah, and one of the things that C4 has always been is sort of that podcast that's always looked to chart that new path. The cool thing is there's lots of others out there charting new paths themselves. Like I have heard so many different voices now simply in the Canucks podcasting and social space that we'd have otherwise not heard. So it's kind of cool. And if there's one thing that I really value about the podcasting experience that you kind of miss out on the radio side is that it tends to be a little more personable because we're a lot more, I think, laid back. Radio has rules. As much as you want to make it laid back, there are rules that we can maybe dance around. So if you have ideas of voices you want to hear on the show, drop us a line, let us know, and we'll look to see if we can make that happen. One thing, just because you say you should talk to this person, if Anna and I do not like them,
we don't have a very long list of enemies, but
yeah, well, I wouldn't say that it's more the voices you'll never hear on our show, which I also feel acts as a good segue. This came up in C4 Discord since our last episode, but to make it very clear, C4 Discord and C4 as a podcast is a Barstool Sports free zone.
Yes,
and that means everything affiliated with Barstool Sports. We are not going to tell you whether or not you should or should not like them. But I can assure you we will not tolerate anyone who tries to go and talk about them. And again, it has nothing to do with intent. It's just, they are them.
Telling off or anything like it. It's just, that's not our stuff.
No. And I don't think we've ever been explicit about that. Consider that explicit.
Yeah, but that's our line. Party line.
Exactly. Beyond that, ELE, everybody love everybody. What final words of wisdom do you have for all of our listeners there, Anna?
That was an awesome conversation with Tom. Got really detailed. And I know this is a long episode, but carve out some time because what he had to say was really interesting. So thanks to Tom.
I mean, just at this point of the show, hopefully they did carve out the time and are listening to you, because
I guess I'm thanking you for doing that. That's
much better.
Thanks.
Final words of wisdom from me. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy. And if you happen to have any ideas to how to keep a 3.5-year-old entertained over the course of 2 weeks stuck in a 1-bedroom condo, send them my way. I want your words of wisdom, because it's going to be an interesting 2 weeks. So on behalf of Anna Forsyth at A4603, myself, Chris Golden at Lightforce, and the C4 Canucks Hockey Podcast on CanucksHockey.com and the Full Press Coverage Network, we're going to sign off this show with those words of "We out."